All right. And did you make me a co-host? Oh, you're muted,
Uh,
Corey.
it'll only let me make it where you can share. It won't let me make you
Oh,
co-host
okay,
because I
okay.
have to
Oh,
let people
yeah.
in.
Okay.
So
Oh,
you
okay.
should
I
be able
see.
to share your screen.
Yeah, I can still share my screen. Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
You'll have to forgive me, Corey. It's the middle of the day, but I own a alcohol-free bar, so I was up till 1 a.m. So I still, yes, of course I can share my screen as a person in the. Okay. All
No
right.
problem.
Let's go ahead and get started. All right. Well, welcome to Above the Bar. My name is Chris Marshall, and today I want to talk to you about my life. And in that life story, I hope to share a little bit about some of the things that I've learned in regards to mental health and alcoholism. So, some things about me. I identify as someone who is living with anxiety and depression. My pronouns are he and him. And I sit here in Austin, Texas on um, land that was owned and occupied by the Caddo Indians. I've been alcohol free since 2017. I own an alcohol free bar here in Austin called Sans Bar or Sans Bar, like Corey said. And then over the next hour, we're going to talk about trauma, alcohol use, and self harm. And I just mentioned that because I want people to be aware of the fact that we may be talking about those things. And ultimately, whenever we have those conversations, sometimes some things can come up for folks. So please be mindful of that. And if you feel triggered by anything that's being shared, please feel free to step out. I totally understand. This is about education, and I don't want to ever trigger anyone. So I just want to say that up front that I'm going to be talking about trauma, alcohol use, and self-harm. All right. So my early life. Trauma, this quote here that says, trauma is not personal or is personal. It does not disappear if it's not validated. When it is ignored or invalidated, the silent screams continue internally heard only by the one held captive. So my life started off as a pretty normal life. I was born to two parents who loved me immensely. My mom was a teacher. My father was a pro amateur boxer and an all around good man. When we talk about mental health, oftentimes we start with the person that's in front of us, or we start with ourselves. But what we don't recognize is that mental health is hereditary, and not only is it hereditary, but behaviorally, the way that people's mental health presents in our life impacts us. And so it's easy to just start with my own mental health or my father's own mental health struggles, but I have to go all the way back to at least my grandfather. And my grandfather, my father's father, was alcohol dependent, uh, physically and verbally abusive to my grandmother, and my father saw this, and he would go on to be the exact opposite of that. He wanted to do everything he could to be a man who was loving and safe. And so he found boxing at a very young age, and that helped him to become the kind of man that he wanted to be. But his trauma, I think, impacted his mental health in many ways. But then I experienced trauma very early on with my father. He was, by all accounts, living a normal life and doing pretty well in life. And we had this incident in my home where I broke a fish tank. It was this prize fish tank. It was a thing that he curated and cared about so much. And I think in a lot of ways, it was the first world that he created and was able to take care of and manage. And he created it before I think I know before I came along, even I think before my mother and him started dating. It was something of great value to him. Um, so I broke this fish tank, and it was a moment. I think probably like the first time in my life I ever felt shame. I ever felt guilt, I ever felt that negative emotion. It just absolutely changed my life. My father simultaneously, and this is something that we just did not know at the time, but simultaneously was starting to have very early struggles with schizophrenia. And so in my 5-year old mind, breaking this fish tank broke my father. And it was just really hard to separate those two incidences because it seemed like he changed as a person when that happened. And it was very close in time, but it was not the activating event. It's not what caused him to get sick. But it's very hard to convince a 5-year-old brain that that's not the case. As a result of that, he began to get really, really sick and behave in ways that were very unhealthy. And I was the recipient of some of that negative behavior. Um, and I just, had these little points down here that yes, all trauma is valid, whether it's trauma that is cataclysmic and alters your life, or it's witnessing a car accident at a young age. Whatever the trauma is, it's valid. And we have to start beginning to believe that all trauma, um, it may weigh differently, but it impacts the brain and it impacts development in a significant way. And then often Black boys are taught to repress trauma or their traumatic responses. Oftentimes as a Black boy, I was told that I was the man of the house. I was told that I had to grow up and I had to protect and defend and do all of these things. And it only created more trauma when I was unable to care and protect and be the man. I was taught to not feel. I was taught to move on, to dust myself off and keep going. And I think that all of those micro traumas made it impossible to form and develop in the way that I had hoped. And so those traumas, again, some were really big and some are, still so very painful that it's hard to even talk about here. But my personal trauma caused an avoidant attachment style, guilt, and self-hatred. I blame myself not only for my father getting sick, but then my parents divorcing, and then for every subsequent thing that would happen. It was all my fault. Um, and so I was just determined to just avoid people as a means to not hurt anyone else. I built a wall around myself so that I wouldn't hurt other people. My life kind of continues in that way. I grew up so I started off in kind of Houston, Texas, and then we moved to a suburb of Houston called Sugar Land, Texas. And in Sugar Land, I felt like I did not belong. It was a predominantly white community, and I was one of a handful of kids of color. Um, I just recall never fitting in and always being reminded of my Blackness, but in the worst way possible. Um, I had this shame around the way that I had to swallow microaggressions to just belong and fit in. One example is, one of the first jobs I ever had was working at a country club, and I was a bag boy. And so you pick up the members come, you take the bag off the golf cart, you clean up the clubs, you put the clubs in the bag room, and you're working for tips. And I would see my white peers getting twice the tips that I was getting, but they also weren't subject to the kind of things that I was subject to, where members of that country club would stop and tell me a racist joke about Black men hanging, or absent fathers and Black men. And I had to just swallow that. I just had to just smile along, laugh along, and pretend like it didn't impact me. But really, each of those little slices just hurt. They just cut really, really deep. And at 16 years old, I learned that I could quiet my mind. I could quiet the anxiety that I was feeling. I could quiet all those negative statements that I just had to endure by living in a predominantly white world with alcohol. And almost instantly, alcohol became the way that I medicated, the way that I numbed all the shame, not just from my teenage years, but all those other years, I numbed all that trauma that I experienced. And it created this toxic cycle where over time I would drink to get numb, and then I would do something that was completely foolish and problematic, which would cause more shame. And I need to drink to numb that, and it was just a cycle that kept building up on itself. Um, I did not belong in this world, and I ultimately believed that I wasn't worthy of belonging in this world. Um, Alcohol, I mean, also it's important to note here that alcohol also gave me a sense of belonging. The first time I ever drank in my life, I was with a group of my friends. They were all white, and I remember the way that we had that first experience. It was, for them, it was nothing. It was another day. It was another hot summer day. But for me, it was a moment where I was deeply bonded with these boys. I felt like we had just completed this rite of passage. I connected drinking instantly. I mean, instantly, with the sense of being a boy, being a teenage boy, being young and reckless, and all the things that I saw my peers living in comfortably. I think the lesson of my teenage years is that white kids and white teenagers experience life way differently than I do. My mom had to sit down and tell me, you are not like them. You're not going to ever be like them. You have to accept that you are different. And alcohol told me that that was a lie. Alcohol told me that I was just like them. I could be just like them, and I could find acceptance. And if I didn't find it, it didn't matter because I was drinking anyways. Um, it was very, very powerful to me in that way. Um, Alcohol was my best friend, and I was drinking for reasons that my friends were not. I was not drinking because I wanted to relax. I was not drinking because I wanted to have a good time. I was drinking alcohol because it was my medicine, because it was the way that I navigated, um, what would become mental health stuff, but also just that shame piece that I had never resolved since age 5. So drinking became a way to connect with others, but over time, as I moved from high school to college, my drinking began to cause isolation. No one wanted to be around me. I was in a fraternity in college, and my fraternity brothers were like, "You're drinking way too much," uh, which is a sign that you're drinking way too much. Um, I wasn't allowed to go to the parties. I wasn't invited to go to formals because I would always make a fool of myself. I would always drink too much. Um, I became a monster. Um, you know, Kind of going back to my family system, my mom, I mean, and bless her, she did everything that she could to give me stability. She did everything she could um, to be there for me as my father continued to cycle in and out of mental health institutions. Over especially my teenage years, I saw less and less of my father. But yet his presence was always felt. It was like a black hole where I couldn't see him, but I could feel his absence in my life. And my mom did everything that she could to help me feel like I was cared for and I was safe, but I just couldn't do that. And so I ended up becoming this monster that I feared. I became my father. I became someone who was looking out of the blinds at 7 o'clock in the morning, terrified that the police were going to come and get me, that someone was after me. Um, that is the level of my alcohol use. I was drinking so much that I found myself in psychosis. Um, Self-harm is also a part of my alcohol story. I don't know when or why it began, but part of me felt this need to purge whatever sickness was inside of me. And I began cutting myself. And um, it's something that I, even now when I think about it, it's the one thing that just breaks my heart, that that this boy, this young man at 21, 22, felt the need to injure himself, to get rid of or alleviate whatever it was that was plaguing him. And then I just want to talk about my extended family, because while my extended family understood kind of like mental health because of my father, I think they really struggled to understand alcohol use. They really didn't understand why I was drinking. They didn't really understand how to talk about it. And we're gonna talk about that towards the end. But I just believe that a lot of the challenge for my family was to wrap their head around why I lived in a middle class home. I had I had a 2-story house growing up. My mom was an assistant principal and then became a principal. I went out of country before I was in high school. Like, I had a good life. And I think the message that we, in communities of color especially, we have this idea that alcohol dependence or alcohol abuse has to look like someone on the side of the road experiencing homelessness. It has to look like, um, you know, someone under the shade tree just getting drunk every single day. That's not always what alcohol use and dependence looks like. That's not what substance use and dependence look like. That's not what marijuana dependence looks like. It doesn't always look like what we imagine it to look like. I think that's worth saying, and I come from the sobriety world, but I think for people who aren't in that world, it's important to know, like, it can look like anything. The struggle with substances can look like anything in the world. So eventually I got help. I was admitted to rehab and got better with the help of medication and therapy. And for the first time in my entire life, I began to feel hope. I began to feel like there was a chance at me living a normal life. But newly sober, I felt this intense need to work to cover up the shame that I felt from 5 years old to my teenage years to what at college. I had this intense desire to make up for this lost time that I thought I had experienced. All my friends at that age, at 23, my friends were out of college. My friends were going on vacations to, Colorado and going to Europe on vacation. And I was just getting out of rehab. And so I was just like, okay, how quickly can I make up for this lost time? How fast can I make up ground that I've lost because of my alcohol use? And I found a community within the 12 steps. 12-step groups were really important to me very early on, but I was still in Sugarland, still in a place where I was one of few, if any, people of color. And I moved to Austin about 2 years into my sobriety, but I was still told to leave my Blackness at the door. And an example that comes to mind is I was trying to get a job interview. I went to school, became a counselor, and I was interviewing for a job. And the interview went well, but I didn't get the job. And so it really bothered me. It just like, it didn't sit right with me. I felt like I did a really good job. I tried really hard. And so when I went to the 12-step meeting, I said, you know what, I just need to share. And part of my share included this idea that I wasn't sure if I didn't get the job because I wasn't qualified or because of the color of my skin. That's how I really felt. That was impacting my sobriety. But someone pulled me aside and said, you know what? We don't talk about that here. That's an outside issue. We don't talk about, race, because that's going to divide us. We need to just focus on not drinking. And I just accepted that. I just said, okay. I just said, like I had always done. And that's what I find interesting. It's like so much of this stuff did not stop just because of my sobriety. Just because I stopped drinking did not end the struggle around a lot of these issues for me. And so I also believed that I was cured of anxiety and depression. I thought that because I stop drinking. I would never have those deep depressive episodes that led me to harm myself. Um, Alcohol was what I thought was responsible for a lot of this stuff. And honestly, and I'm trying to think about this. I really did forget that when I was in middle school, I was having thoughts of ending my life. Like I had, this mental health stuff predates the alcohol use, but I was so focused on the alcohol problem that I did not realize that these issues were here long before alcohol ever entered my life. But I did believe that I would never have any problems or any struggles with anxiety or depression because I was sober. So one of my favorite stories growing up was the story of John Henry. And I'll try to paraphrase it really quickly for those of you who don't know the story. But John Henry is an African American folk hero who, let's see, we got some questions here. Let's see here. Let's try to get to the questions. Oh no, might have to have Corey help me out there. But
yeah, it was just people commenting saying, it was like some hearts, and then I just said it was really helpful. Some of the stuff you were sharing.
Okay.
Right now, so we're good.
Okay. Cool. Just want to make sure I was checking in with everyone. Okay, so
I'll let you know.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, story of John Henry. John Henry was is an American fable, tall tale about a man who actually was a real man. I did a deep Wikipedia dive last week and found that there was actually a man believed to be an actual John Henry, John William Henry. But the story of John Henry is a man who goes against this machine. He's promised this land if he can work on the railroads. He's got this kid and his wife, and he wants to give them this new land. He kind of post-slavery, and this machine comes along, and this company says we can outwork any man, and the company that John Henry works for is so concerned because this is the first kind of instances of machine replacing man. And so John Henry says, I can take that machine, I can do better than it can, I can bore through this tunnel. So there was a competition, and it was John Henry against machine, literally man versus machine. And as a kid, I used to love this story because it was the story of this powerful man. He's got these hammers and he's just chiseling through this mountain. And the story ends with John Henry winning, beating the machine, and dying. And I always thought it was really interesting. Of all tall tales, you have Paul Bunyan, Johnny Appleseed. You have a few others that are like Americana when you think of tall tales. Johnny Appleseed lives, Paul Bunyan lives, John Henry works himself to death. That's the story that I heard a lot as a kid. It's like, we work hard. Black men work hard. To be a Black man means you work hard. It means that you exhaust yourself in service of your family, of larger ideas. That is what you do. In school, you learn about Malcolm X, you learn about Martin Luther King, and you learn that those men worked until they died, until they were killed. And that image, that message was something that I wasn't consciously aware of, but it was always present in the background of my mind. And so when I got sober, when I got better, I again just did all the things, checked all the boxes off, went to school, I got married, started my career as a counselor. I felt this desire to chisel into the mountain, to bore ahead, to work harder. I was literally nonstop. I was, after I got married, I was like, okay, we got to have kids. We went from like trying to have kids to like, we got to adopt. Okay, we're adopting 2 kids. We're doing that. We're doing this. Okay, my job as a counselor, that's great. Now I need to get experience as inpatient counselor and then outpatient counselor. I got to do all this. I got to ascend and rise, through the ranks. I kept going. I ascribed to this belief that that growth had to be linear, that you're supposed to just be this always rising upward, growing, healthy person, and that any step back is a sign that you were not healthy. And that's, I learned a lot of that in the 12-step groups I was in. It was teaching me that sliding back was the worst thing that could ever happen to you. So I couldn't even acknowledge to myself that the stress and the weight of all this stress was literally killing me. And then at 10 years sober, I decided to start Sandspar, which came from my work as working with people who were struggling with alcohol use. I saw people needed this space. There was not anywhere cool to go if you weren't drinking. And so I created a space for it and here in Austin. And Sandspar was doing really, really well. It was taking off. I was, I got features in all these cool newspapers and other publications. Incredible opportunities, just incredible opportunities. In 2019, I went on a tour across the country. I mean, this was the dream. And still it wasn't enough. Still it wasn't giving me the wholeness that I desired. I wanted to feel whole. Breaking that fish tank broke my sense of feeling whole. And all my life, I've been trying to glue myself back together. And Sandspar was a great way to get out into the world, to do something good. But it was still never enough. Oh, looks like my presentation froze up here. Let's see here. I don't know what happened.
Maybe try to unshare and then share again.
Okay. Still nothing. Okay. Darn.
See if you can progress it when it's not sharing. Is it moving forward off screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Try sharing again and let's see if it'll re-engage. You know how technology is. It does what you want it to do when you don't need it to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, let's see here. Share screen. All right, there we go. Okay, back on it. All right, so all of this work reaches a breaking point. 2019, my father died. The last time I spoke to my father was Father's Day of 2019. And our conversations were always very short. He, spent his life in and out of facilities, in and out of jail. We have a really bad habit in this country of institutionalizing and criminalizing mental health, where I think if he were anyone else, he'd probably get help. My father found himself in jails instead of hospitals most of his life, and I was sick for the worst of it. I was myself, recovering from my own problems. So we never really had a chance to connect. But I did make my peace with him before he passed. But it was still shocking nonetheless. He was relatively young. Um, so I buried my father. And then a week later, my uncle, the youngest uncle that I have, the one who was closest to me in age and who tried to be a father to me the best way he knew how, and which was not well, because he was a kid. I mean, he was trying to be a big brother, trying to be a father role, and we never got along. But when I got sober, he wrote a letter to me, and he said that he was proud of me, um, and that was an incredible feeling because I had never had a father tell me that they were proud of me. So for my uncle to say that was a huge thing for me. So to lose my father, my biological father, and then the man who was closest to me, most like a father to me, pass away in the span of a week of each other. It was just bizarre. Actually, the anniversary of my father's death was on Thursday, and my uncle's anniversary, 2-year anniversary, will be in a couple of days. So this is still very, very fresh. It just upended my life. It upended my life. But I was so set on this idea of working hard, being a hardworking Black man. And it forced me to double down on my business. I didn't even stop to mourn. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop to reflect. I couldn't feel anything because I had built this wall around myself since I was 5 years old. I was not going to let anyone else get hurt because of my toxicity. I was not going to hurt anyone else like I had broken my father. So when I needed to reach out the most, when I needed to be not okay, I couldn't be okay because of this idea that I had to work hard. I had to be on, I had to be engaging. I had to be the owner of this business. I had to not show weakness. All these messages, just all these messages were in my head. And at 13 years of sobriety, not 3 months, not a decade, but at 13 actual years of not drinking, I found myself depressed and contemplating ending it all. And I've struggled to say that out loud because I know that we view growth, especially with mental health, as this linear progression, like I said. And so for me to say that I've had 13 years sober, but I struggled in this way. I was deeply depressed, and the thoughts of ending my life did happen. I did have those thoughts. I'm really glad I didn't act on it or move forward with it, but I did have the thought. It was a very low place in my life. And in that low place, I had an experience and decided that I didn't want to live this way anymore. And so I had to figure out why or how I got there. I had to figure out how did I get here? How did, after 13 years of sobriety, married, kids, life going well, career going well, business taking off, first time creating a business and it's doing well. I'm living my dream. I'm literally doing the thing that makes me the most happy in life. I am on fire for the life that I live, but I'm also so unhappy. And not only am I unhappy, it's that when this wall came, I could not get through it. I could not get over it. It seemed like the only option was to delete myself from this existence. How did I get here? How did I become this kind of person? We are all lies waiting. Well, let me this other way. We are all lies waiting for the day when we will break free from our cocoon and become the beautiful truth we waited for. That quote has just transformed my life because I believe that I was living a lie. And I believe that we all live lies to some degree. But some lies just kill us. Some lies keep us so small that we can never be who we need to be. Some lies ensnare us and prevent our wings from growing and drying so we can fly and become the beautiful person that we're supposed to be. And I was living so many lies about what it meant to be a man, about what it meant to be free from shame, about who I was in this world. And things had to change if I wanted to experience life again in a different way. And again, this was like in 2019, like towards the end of 2019. And so I had to get real about myself. And so I did three things. I challenged my beliefs. What do I believe about myself? Well, I believed that I was a good person, but when I dug down a couple levels, I was like, but you still believe you're that 5-year-old kid. You still believe that you did this, that you broke your father, that you broke your family, that you're responsible for everything that happened, that you're responsible for every way that your father hurt other people. That is something I had never reconciled before. I also believe that I was a man who had to be in control all the time, who had to always know. I believe that because society taught me to believe that. I didn't necessarily believe that about myself, but everywhere around me, I saw the idea of men who work themselves to death, the John Henry myth, right? Like I'm supposed to work myself into my grave. I'm supposed to work myself through emotional problems. That is how I'm supposed to navigate my life, is to work through the hard things. Then I had to accept myself as imperfect and ask for help. I had to accept that all growth is nonlinear, that there's no beginning, middle, and end of getting better. It is a continual journey of middles and beginnings and ends. It is a mixture of all three states at one time. That is the nature of growth, and it's inherently imperfect. And I just had to let go of this idea that I was ever going to be perfect, ever going to be healed. I was ever going to be without problems, because that's not realistic. Humans by nature are problems, but they're also solutions, right? Like we are both, and I can be both. I can be both proficient and sure of myself and still growing and discovering and then learning. I can be both. And then I had to replace what people, stressors, and mindsets did I need to replace. So I still surrounded myself with a bunch of people who did not value me as a Black man. They valued me as a man. They valued me as a person, as a human being, as a businessman, but they didn't see my Blackness. And this was made evident after George Floyd. A lot of my friends that I believed saw me just didn't. And I had to move away from those friends. I had to replace those friends. And I think it's important that we say replace and not remove, because if you remove something, you need to put something in its place. If you remove alcohol from your life, you have to replace it with something else. And what is that something else? It's a community, it's a connection. Removing something without putting something in is always, you're always at risk of damaging the integrity of whatever it is. I mean, I just had this thought about, dental work, right? They try to replace it with something. They remove a cavity. They fill it in with something. They replace it with something. So what people, stressors, and mindsets do I need to replace? I needed to replace those people out of my life who didn't see me fully as a Black man in America. I needed to replace the stressors of working nonstop and this idea that I had to be this person that was always going. And then the mindset of hustle culture. I had to let that go. So my life today, I believe that I don't have to be perfect to be loved. I believe that being a man means being honest about my struggles. And I rejected the hustle culture. I rejected this culture that says you need to work yourself to death. I've accepted that while I no longer struggle with alcohol, I will have peaks and valleys in my mental health. And a setback does not mean I am a failure. Just because I have a setback, and I'm going to have a setback. I mean, this year, even last week, I found myself just spacing out because this anniversary of my father it hit me harder than I thought it would. But this time I was able to give myself that grace and say, you know what? Yeah, it should hurt. It should cause you to have a disruption in your normal workflow, or your kids may not understand why you're upset, but you're just not in the mood to play. Like that's okay. That's okay, because you're going through something that is hard for all human beings. But I just noticed there's this tenderness in the way that I talk to myself today that wasn't present before this. And again, replacing people who do not affirm my Blackness and sobriety with people who did. And there are people who in my life did not respect my sobriety. They did not respect the fact that I had made this decision to not drink alcohol. And they would kind of tease me about it. They would give me, crap for it. And I just decided that I was not going to entertain that anymore. I didn't have to entertain that anymore. And so some closing thoughts. I really suggest that we talk to men in our life about mental health and substance use. The best way that you can help someone in your life who's struggling is to talk about your own struggles, not just with alcohol use or depression or anxiety, but also just in general. We don't do enough of sharing our struggles. Again, because we had this idea that we cannot share anything that makes us look weak or deficient. But I encourage you to talk to the men in your life and share whatever struggle you can with them. Most folks dealing with substance abuse also have some unresolved trauma. This is borne out in statistics and studies. We see that people that have substance use problems are dealing with whatever is going on in their heads. And they're self-medicating, much like that 16-year-old boy was that I told you about a couple minutes ago, that was using alcohol to feel like he was connected to people and to feel a part of. And recognize that rest is a revolutionary act in a society that constantly pushes us to work to prove our worth. Rest is revolution, especially for Black folks and people of color. We don't have to work ourselves to death. We shouldn't work ourselves to death. And then lastly, teach children that boys are worthy of accessing the full range of emotions. I think my mom did the best that she could, honestly, and telling me that it was okay to cry, it was okay to feel. She never was the kind of parent that said, don't cry, suck it up, boys don't cry. She never said that. But I don't think she ever said it was okay to be angry. It was okay to work through your anger. I think she never said that, because I think if she would have, I think people around me would have encouraged me to be angry. They would have allowed me to process that and cycle all the way from anger to the primary emotion of fear. And then I could share with the world how afraid I was, how scared I was, how terrified I was of becoming my father. I don't know how much that would have changed things, but I think it would have made it a lot easier for me to express where I was and communicate with the world just how lonely I felt and just how depressed I was. So yeah, I think I want to stop there because we have about 10-ish minutes. And so yeah, I want to open up for questions. I saw there was some chat.
Well, first, I just want to say, Chris, man, I appreciate you sharing your story. I've heard of your bar, but I really now hear the story behind it, and the vulnerability that you shared with is so deep, and just how your journey is so many people's journey, you know what I'm saying? And whether it's lived out through, alcohol or using alcohol, people are finding ways to cope with what is becoming normal for their lives, you know what I'm saying? As far as, I mean, all of us are experiencing some level of trauma, and we have to have, we need healthy ways to manage that. All of us have had some sort of trauma in our background from a family experience. Even like you said, if you had a nice home and, quality education and all of those things, so much of what you shared hit to the root of where many people are. So I'm really excited that you were able to share it today. I'm really excited too that we were able to record it, because I think so many people can benefit from what you shared today. So I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate that.
Are there any questions from our viewers?
I did see a question that was posted earlier, like before this session started. Other than psychologists, how do you identify and resolve the trauma? Great question. I think that much like if I have car problems, can I fix it myself? Yes. Can I guarantee that it's going to be quality work? No. You really do need a professional. And I really, again, I was a licensed clinician in the state of Texas for 8 years. So I speak from a position of someone who was a professional clinician and someone on the receiving end, someone who's been in therapy for a decade of his life. There is just really no way to work through a lot of that stuff without a professional. You really need a professional. And there are so many professionals of color. There's so many LGBTQ plus clinicians. There's so many people who are willing to walk you through that, but you do need a professional, in my opinion. There's just no way that you can do this on your own. It's hard, but I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have a, yeah. And I think that's, the response is, just struggling to open up and go deep enough. And I think that it took me a decade. And literally, I was talking to my therapist. It took me 10 years of going to the same therapist before I felt like I could truly trust her. I told her that. I was like, it's taking you 10 years of working with the same person before I felt like I could really show you the parts of myself that I thought were unlovable. I could not. I kept giving her little breadcrumbs. And so it took this person 10 years. I don't know what it's going to take someone else, but it took me a long time, and it shouldn't take someone that long, but it takes what it takes, right? Like we have to get rid of the idea that it's instant and you're going to instantly feel this change in your life, because you don't. Growth is non-linear, but it's also not governed by an exact specific time. You can't say in 6 months you're going to feel X, Y, and Z, because we all have different things to work through. And so it may take people longer than it takes others. It took me 10 years. Literally, it took me 10 years to open up.
Hey, Chris, it's your girl.
Hey, Tom.
What's up? You always blow me away when you share your story. And I just love that you made a slideshow. You gave us that visual element, and it's just beautiful. So I don't really have a question. I just want to say that I think the cover of your book should be a broken fish tank.
I agree. I agree. Thank you so much, Tony, for joining and supporting. I appreciate you. The question that was asked, I'm trying to get to, this app is not the most convenient thing here.
Okay, let me get to it for you. It said, what tools do you support in achieving this rising above? Other than heredity, stress is a huge driver in triggering alcohol predilection. What are your thoughts on ways to intercede before it reaches problem status?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think that one way that we can do that is to recognize those early warning signs, right? When we see children who, when we see children who are struggling with substance use early on, it's important to catch that. And the way that we, I think about substance use has to change. Like, I think my mom knew what I was doing, but she thought it was a rite of passage. It's like, oh, well, this is, you're just at that age, boys are going to start smoking, not just boys, but everyone starts smoking cigarettes, they, may experience with alcohol, like that's okay. And what my mom and I think other people didn't realize is that at 16, at 15 and 14, I was already self-medicated. I was drinking and using the substances for a different reason other than experimentation. It was medication. And if you have a history of substance use or mental health in your family, like I said, my mental health story does not start with me. It starts with my grandfather. And it probably goes back further than that. If I can kind of trace my mental health family tree, I could probably go back several generations. And on my mom's side, the same thing. My my grandmother's twin sister had schizophrenia. So there was, all these different, on both sides of my family, a lot of mental health stuff. And if we can educate our children early on and say, hey, you may have a real tendency to have some mental health stuff happen. My kids are adopted, but I know based on like not only their life circumstance, but because both of their parents struggle with mental health stuff, that they probably will struggle with mental health stuff in their life. And in addition to just being adopted, that is going to be a struggle for them. And so we're parenting with that in mind. We're parenting with this understanding that this may be a struggle. But yes, hereditary and stress are huge triggers to alcohol use and dependence. I think the only way to stop it is when the community around you recognizes it.
One more question I had. Here we go. Rashawn left another one. What is the fireside chat about?
Oh, you've been on the website. Okay, cool. So Fireside Connection is so in response to the pandemic and not being able to meet up. Sam's Bar was closed for a year. We're open now every Friday here in Austin, but we were closed. And so in response to that, I wanted to create an experience. So we do these camping trips where it's Friday night to Sunday morning, and we go out in nature. Everyone gets their own tent. We socially distance, and it's an opportunity to connect with other people. Most people that come don't drink, and this is a sober weekend, so there's no alcohol or substances, but it's an opportunity to connect with people, and people just leave feeling incredibly connected. It's a very special thing. So if you're in the Austin area, even if you're in Texas, I mean, we've had people fly in from out of state to come camp with us. Our next one is October 1st to the 3rd. All the meals are provided, all the tents provided. It's an amazing experience. So if you're thinking about it, if you saw it and it called you, I suggest you buy that ticket and join us. And you have a question, Corey?
Oh, I was going to say, for people who have not really, how do you communicate to people who don't have like necessarily a history of alcoholism in their family? Do you ever talk to people like about how to have a healthy relationship with alcohol? Like if,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What does that look like?
Go ahead, Corey. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, yeah. What does that look like for you as a person who has obviously a alcohol-free bar and value sobriety? How do you talk to people about having a healthy relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, I'm not a prohibitionist. I'm not anti-alcohol at all. I believe that alcohol has a place in this world. So I just, encourage people to do something called mindful drinking, to be aware of how much they're drinking and how that alcohol impacts their life. And so, one thing I suggest people do is to take a couple weeks or a month off. Do dry July, do a cleanse if you want. Just make sure that you're examining your relationship with alcohol, because just like with anything, like with food or sex or gambling or any other thing, these things can quickly turn into something that's out of our control. And we just have to be careful not to, good recommendation there, Tawny. Finding, being mindful about how alcohol impacts our life I think is the key. Again, no one's saying you can't drink, just saying be mindful of how it's impacting your life. Be mindful of how you can reduce or limit alcohol in your life, if that's your goal. If your goal is to continue to drink normally, that's okay too. But I think most people that question themselves and their alcohol use find that there's something there. And if you stay with that and you pull on that thread, you may find that there's another life out there for you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Chris. You have done an amazing job. I'm going to stop the recording real quick.